let's get into the next coach here. All right. We're talking about FIU, Florida International University, a school that has neglected its football program for a number of years. Uh, Maybe thought they had something in Mike McIntyre. And you know what? At the time, I'm sure I would have come on here and said it was a good hire. You know, given his decent success at Colorado, his head coaching experience. Now you're bringing in a guy, Willie Simmons. He's got ties to the state of Florida. He's won, just about everywhere he's been. You got, a lot more interesting stuff going on inside of that athletic department. Scott Carr, I think, is doing a really nice job there trying to, emphasize building on infrastructure and emphasizing on revenue, because I think he understands that if you want to be successful as an athletic department, you have to pour money into your program and find different ways to do that. Right now, I think he's doing a really good job of that. And if Willie Simmons, is going to be the guy that's going to ride the coattails of this surge in athletic funding for this FIU program, he just might be not the right guy, but one of the right guys that they could have hired.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I'll just come on and say I'm super excited for Willie Simmons. If you've been plugged in, in the HBCU, and if you've been plugged in, I think in the state of Florida, you know how good of a coach he is and what he can do at that program. And also, like you talked about, maybe the school neglecting his football program. It's a new football program. 2002, I think, was its first year inseminated, and then obviously, 2004 was its first year in FBS, and you kind of haven't built a winning tradition. You've been to 5 bowl games, which is more than some other programs have been in.
Yeah,
It's been in the FBS for longer, but again, it's not
you've
something.
won more bowl games than Indiana has in the last 30 years.
Just crazy. And yeah, but yeah, exactly. And you also, like, being in the state of Florida, like, that's going to give you its benefits, but also its downsides, because there is so much to do there, and you do have other big programs: Miami, University of Florida, obviously Gainesville, Florida State, even UCF, USF now, FAU, whatever it may be.
All with good coaches right now,
All
seemingly.
with good coaches that we're pretty high on. Or maybe, say what you
No
want about
Scott Frost.
Norvell, but it's Scott Frost. But it's just interesting. And also, too, and Willie Simmons talked about it, is like, if you grew up in Miami, if you even went to FIU, they have tons of alumni. It's a huge 54,000, students a year. But if you grew up in FIU and went to FIU, or FIU, excuse me, in the 90s and 80s, like, you were a Hurricanes fan, right? In the early 2000s, you were a Hurricanes fan because this program didn't have a football team, or it was brand new, and whatever it may be. And so I think, Simmons understands the situation he's in and is trying to market and use the benefits of Miami, but it's easier said than done to be able to do that. I mean, this program, we talked about, like, off air a little bit. How good of a job is this in the CUSA? I mean, it's a new program. It does not have a history and tradition of winning, but that does not mean that the infrastructure and that the resources are there to be able to win. I think you're seeing an uptick in funding and obviously investment, right? We talked about we've seen the weight room and other facilities kind of be built up recently. You have a beautiful campus. The weather's fantastic. So convincing kids to come down to Florida, especially in, the winter transfer portal cycle and also spring recruiting, is not very hard to do. You're second in the CUSA in enrollment. You're second in the CUSA in revenue from athletics. You're also spending, right, an equal amount. You're second in the CUSA in expenses in athletics. You're second in the CUSA in endowment. And by the way, all this is because Liberty is just head and shoulders above everybody else. You've got over 300,000 alumni that you're trying to convince to become, FIU fan. I think that it's interesting, and I love the prospects of Willie Simmons getting in there. Florida guy, obviously success at FAMU, obviously success wherever he's been, and just such a great man himself. It's going to be awesome. I cannot wait. I am all in. Plus, you got Pitbull and what he did, and buying the rights to the stadium and having all these, you know, concerts and events there. It's
The
$1.2 million
Miami Vice
per year.
jerseys.
The Miami Vice jerseys, and kind of leaning into, the 305. And it's super interesting. Also, like, so this USA, if you're FIU, you're getting $800,000 annually for media rights deal, which is a lot of money, but not compared to the 80 million that the Big Ten schools are making, or
Right.
the 30, 40 million that your neighbors, Miami University, is making. But that $1.2 million per year, like, is a huge boost, right? Almost over doubling your revenue, from that there in athletics there, just from now those couple things there is big time. It's big time. You talked about Scott Carr and what he's done as AD, and just kind of being able to use that in modern college football when you've got the house settlement coming, and like, how much money is your conference going to be able to spend on these players? And if you're FIU, you have that extra $1.2 million to spend on coaches and recruiting and other things for your football and I guess other athletic programs. But yeah, it's super exciting.
Yeah, 1000%. And like sometimes things are timing too, right? Like if you had maybe hired Willie Simmons, 2 years ago, I wouldn't be as high. He might get a higher grade actually because the expectations would be a little bit lower, right? But the thing is here, timing is everything as well with these hires. So now you have these funds in this athletic program trending in the right direction. Let's go back to 2021 when Mike McIntyre was hired. All right. Let's talk about timing. Okay. Butch Davis fired on November 15th. Scott Carr was hired as the AD 2 weeks later on December 1st. Mike McIntyre was hired 8 days later. All right. You tell me. Okay. Was Scott Carr even heavily involved in this hire? I don't even know. I'm not plugged into that program, but 8 days after you were hired there, I mean, I get it. Like, he worked at UCF, so like it wasn't that far away. I mean, it actually kind of was, and you were pretty decently far away. But the reality was like 8 days, right? The season wasn't even over yet. It felt like a pretty dang rushed hire, and like maybe you just were locked in on Mike McIntyre being the guy. But I don't know. I don't know. It just. But now you had an opportunity to take your time with this hire. You moved on from Mike McIntyre, and you had time to evaluate this. You have the money to pour in to. I mean, he's going to get paid the same amount as Mike McIntyre, but the money is being allocated well better than it was back in 2021 when Mike McIntyre took over this program. And
Well, that's what Butch Davis was upset about too. I mean,
yeah,
FIU fans will remember him calling out the school and talking about, maybe the sabotage that was self-inflicted sabotage. And I think part of that was, not to cut you off there, but like just a tough time. Like, COVID had hit other schools harder
mhm.
than it hit other schools, right? So like, it was a really hard situation, in the CUSA and for FIU. And Butch Davis, who was building momentum, 8-5, 9-4, 6-7. That's 3 straight bowl games, winning that Bahamas Bowl in 2018 to get to 9 wins, and all of a sudden COVID hits and you go 0-5, and then you go 1-11, and obviously you're out the door after that. But some unforeseen circumstances happen there, and if you're Mike McIntyre and you're Scott Carr, you're kind of playing catch up, and unfortunately, like, it might seem like an opportunity where, like, the old expression, Mike McIntyre walks, so Willie Simmons could run. But yeah, you talked about like timing, momentum, all that stuff matters, and it seems to be trending in a good direction finally for FIU.
So you arguably have the best geography of any school in the CSA. You arguably have the most, if not one of the most resources available in terms of money, right? And you have perhaps not a bigger brand than some of these other CSA schools, but the potential, right, of having a bigger brand in the next couple of years than maybe some of these other schools, just because of the way the sport is growing, right? The way that they've been able to market themselves with the attachment, like you said, to Pitbull. The expectations at FIU actually, like, you can look back at the history of this program and be like, nah, the expectations aren't high. But based on what we're looking at here and what we're evaluating, like, I think it's okay to think the expectations are a little bit higher than maybe the past performance of the last 3 years, right? Like, in the past 3 years, 4-8, 4-8, 4-8, all right, which, like, in most years in the history of FIU's program, that's like a pretty normal set of years, right? But I think they understand what this program is capable of. So, like, we're going to move on and we're going to get a guy that, first of all, Scott Carr likes and had time to interview and hire, right? And be a part of that process. And I know that there's other people involved other than just the AD. I'm just saying your connection between head football coach and AD is very important, right? So, I don't know. Very, very interesting here. I'm pretty high on this one if you want to get into the coaching staff.
Yeah, well, actually, I got a couple more things to get into before we get into
Sure,
that.
absolutely.
So you talk about momentum and like kind of building that right now with Willie Simmons. I love what he's doing off the field too. Obviously, like, I'm not gonna crown a champion in February at all, but like the things he's done so far since he's been hired to me inspire confidence to give this a really good grade, which you'll see at the end of the video here. So the starting quarterback, Keon Jenkins, obviously he was a guy that was in the portal and he turned down more money to stay at home. He's a Miami kid, and Willie Simmons obviously sold him on his offense. And we'll get to Willie Simmons, what he does offensively, in a little bit. Obviously, being a hometown star as well. 10 full games as a starter, he was like 250 yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 62% completion percentage. Like it's pretty damn good stuff right there in the CUSA for sure. You're getting like a spring game kind of April 5th, right? Which is exciting because not a lot of schools are doing spring games anymore, right? People are scared to do that. You're also going to have off-site scrimmages like at different high schools and other spots in the city of Miami to kind of build momentum in the community and obviously get your name out there, which is super fun. And so we talked about Simmons having ties to the state of Florida. He grew up in Quincy, Florida, which is just outside of Tallahassee. His mother and a lot of his other family members went to Florida A&M. He coached high school football at, Lincoln High School in Tallahassee, coached at Florida A&M. Obviously, he's 44 years old. He's a family man. His father has 6 kids, right? Beautiful family there. He's the first Clemson player. So he played football at Clemson, excuse me. Played at Clemson. He the first Clemson player to ever graduate with a degree in just 3 years, which is awesome. And obviously, like momentum I talked about, like you're seeing results right away. FIU's recruiting class, according to Rivals, is number 1 in the Conference USA as soon as he got there. And it was not just the previous staff. Like, yes, he was able to convince some guys to stay on, but when he had signed his contract, they had only 1 offensive lineman committed. And then they went out and signed 4 more guys, also in the state of Florida, who are big time, actually like pretty darn good, legit, I think, Division I football players. Yeah, it's an exciting time here. And then real quick in terms of like what he's done, his background here. So he took the Florida A&M job, was there for 6 years from 2018 to 2024 or 2023, excuse me, as a head coach. They went 45-13, right? 34-5 in the SWAC in conference play. That's big time. They won 2 HBCU national championships. They won the SWAC championship. They won the Celebration Bowl as well in 2023. He was also the head coach at Prairie View A&M, where he was 21-11, like 19-6, in conference play. He was the first coach there in 55 years to have a winning record in all 3 of his seasons. He was also the OC at Alcorn State. So he's got a lot of ties, in the SWAC and all that kind of stuff. He was also at Mid-Tennessee State, not when they were in the CUSA, but when they were in the Sun Belt as the running backs coach from 2007 to 2009. Also was pass game coordinator, up to 2010, and then also called plays in 2011. And when they were calling plays in 2011, like they put up numbers over 400 yards a game, right? Which led the Sun Belt in total offense. They led in rushing yards, right? 146, and also third down conversions as well. And he also was a GA at Clemson as well. So he's got that, a little bit of Power 4 experience, as well as the running backs coach with Duke. He talked about his ties with Manny Diaz and also his ability to learn from that program, who, by the way, like they went 9-3 this past season, like 9-4 with the bowl game. But that was a program that really got hurt in the portal and in the coaching staff with Mike Elko heading to A&M, and they plug and play Manny Diaz there. I know a lot of coaches have had success at Duke, but does not make it easy to win there. And Manny Diaz and that coaching staff, and Willie Simmons too, it was awesome and super impressive there. And obviously that kind of parlays him into getting this job here at FIU.
What's funny too, we'll talk about grades in a little bit after you talk about this coaching staff. I wouldn't expect like the national media to like be all about this hire, but like I think there's a consensus amongst national media, right? Uh, like people on the beat, the FIU beat. I think there's a national consensus that this is a good hire, and that's going to reflect in my grades, specifically in terms of like expectations, right? But anyways,
Yeah, without a
those
doubt.
are all good points that you make.
It's also going to kind of impact. We'll talk about its staff here. This is a really interesting staff. So, a couple bullet points here before we get into it. Two guys on this staff were two guys that were seriously interviewed for the head coaching job, which is crazy, by the way. Like that Willie Simmons was able to have that lack of ego, basically, to bring those guys in as well, knowing, and also the fact that these guys who are coming in have the lack of ego to put their ego aside and try to win games for FIU. They also had a couple of coaches that players went into Willie Simmons and was like, we need to bring him back. This guy is an awesome coach. I want him back. And having that advocacy from the players is super exciting. This is a big, big time Florida staff. We talked about it a little bit with Sam Houston State and what they do recruiting Texas there and the ties that some of the coaching staff has to Texas. This is on steroids. And I think this is super intentional. Willie Simmons even talked about it before in a couple interviews I saw, how important it is for them to win back, win over, I guess, the 305 and kind of whatever Miami doesn't get, like in some other big programs, obviously, like FIU should be getting, and having that kind of continuity there and familiarity in the state. I think because it is a new program, I do think like learning and like getting around the high school, like these coaches have that familiarity, but FIU doesn't necessarily, right? So that's a big thing there to kind of start bridging that gap. And a lot of them also have been high school head coaches, which I think is awesome, understanding the market and high school head coaches in the state of Florida. So yeah, a couple bullet points there. I'm pretty high in the staff. I'm just gonna come on and say it, and you'll hear me talk about it. Willie Simmons is gonna call plays offensively, and that's no surprise there. So keep that in mind when we're talking about the offensive staff. So the offensive coordinator and the quarterback's coach, right? Not going to be calling plays, but obviously having a lot of responsibilities, is Nick Coleman. Nick Coleman has ties to, Simmons when he was at Middle Tennessee State back in 2010, when he was a GA, for Willie Simmons. He was also the UAB quarterback coach the past couple seasons with Jacob Zeno, who had actually pretty damn good seasons there and parlayed that into be able to transfer into the SEC with A&M. He's really one of the only coaches that doesn't have, crazy FIU ties. So crazy Florida ties. So the tight ends coach is also going to be the assistant head coach. He was a guy that was also interviewed for the job, right? This is Frank Ponce. He coached T.Y. Hilton back at FIU. You remember that? As the wide receiver coach there, he was also a really good high school head coach in the South Florida. He also most recently was the OC at Appalachian State and putting up big time numbers with Joey Aguilar, some running backs and some wide receivers there in the Sun Belt. The wide receivers coach is going to be Jelani Barasa. He was wide receivers coach, at Youngstown State. Most recently, the past couple seasons, the past 5 seasons before that, he was with FAMU, Florida A&M, as a wide receiver coach for Willie Simmons. He's also a native of Miami. He played at Miami Killian High School. The running back coach is Bedrick Hippolyte, very familiar with the state of Florida, right? So he coached at Miami, Florida. He coached at UF. He was the OC at Florida Memorial. He also coached at other, South Florida high schools like Hollandale, Miami Edison, and Booker T. Washington. So you're seeing a trend here, right, in South Florida, but, in the state of Florida as well. And lastly, on the offensive staff, the O-line coach, Edwin Pata. He was with the University of Miami for 5 years, with Mario Cristobal and obviously the previous staff. He was a GA with FIU from 2010 to 2013, so has that familiarity. He's a native of Miami. He also coached at Florida A&M, not when Willie Simmons was there, but before that, from 07 to 010 or 07 to 2010, and then also a second stint 2013 to 2017. So not that there's crossover between the two, but obviously the connections with the mutual people that they did meet. He also played, for FIU when he was in college. So that's the offense staff there. You're seeing a theme, right? And it's going to continue in the defensive staff.
And
there.
It's awesome.
Yep.
Fit matters. It should. It does.
Yeah, and Willie Simmons, obviously, like in similar sense, we talked about Phil Longo and other coaches. Like you're seeing a trend with offensive coaches, like in G5, especially. But like that's his side of the ball. Like he needs to get that right. Like or you trust him to get that right, obviously. And so now you're bringing in him with schematically, him with culture, but now you're bringing in some really good recruiters that you're hoping you can kind of lock down the state of Florida the best you can.
100%. And then we talk about it with offensive minded head coaches, the defensive side of the ball is going to matter a lot. It just is.
Yeah, so the defense coordinator is Javon Dewitt. He was another guy that interviewed for the job. He's been the defense coordinator for FIU the past 4 seasons now, having a couple good seasons and honestly spots where they did play well, in that defense there. Safeties coach as Kenneth Gilstrap. He's also, I think, going to be the special teams coordinator. He was at Florida A&M with Willie Simmons, back in 2018 as the cornerbacks coach. He was also a special teams coordinator at Middle Tennessee. Last year, he was with Nick Coleman. Obviously, I talked about the OC, obviously different sides of the ball, but on the same coaching staff at UAB as the DB coach there. The D-line coach, Kenichi Udezi, I hope I pronounced that right. This was the guy that, the team made a point to bring him back as the defensive line coach. He was the outside linebackers coach last season. As a player, he was a fantastic player. First round pick out of USC. Really, really good at rushing the passer. Obviously, coached in the NFL as well. He has a great resilient story. So unfortunately, in 2008, it kind of cut his playing career short. He was diagnosed with basically leukemia, which kind of stinks. And he received chemotherapy, got a bone marrow transplant from his brother, which is, obviously super sweet there. He tried to come back, but obviously couldn't because he had some, neuro issues there with the chemotherapy. So he had to retire, but obviously he's had a fantastic story. He's been really good for them. They've done some good things, I think, on that side of the ball. And obviously his players are a testament to that and how much they love him. The linebackers coach is Ryan Smith. He's defensive coordinator at Murray State last year. But before that, he was with Simmons basically the whole time. He was one of his right-hand mans on the defense side of the ball for Florida A&M. He was the defense coordinator. He was the linebackers coach. He was recruiting coordinator, director of player personnel, the associate head coach. So he played a lot of roles, wear a lot of hats for him. He's also super familiar with the state of Florida, not only being at Florida A&M, but was also at University of Florida for 3 years as an assistant recruiting coordinator. So understanding the state and the ties there. He's a Perry, Florida native. He served as the head coach of 3 different high schools in the state of Florida. It was Gainesville High School, DeLand High School, and then Taylor County High School, which is where he's from. And then the cornerbacks coach is Anthony Gator. He's been in FIU for 4 years now. Again, with the Florida stuff. So he was a cornerbacks coach this past season for FIU, a native of Miami. He played for FIU. He was drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So again, you're seeing a trend here. It's something I'm not going to complain about at all. Instead, I'm actually going to applaud, Willie Simmons for this is why you brought him in. His ties to the state of Florida, his ties as a recruiting coach, and be able to build a staff, with all his connections and the successes he's had everywhere he's been, and being able to put together a staff that hopefully gives you the best chance to win, come from the fall.
So with all of this, I'm going to talk expectations for a second and then give my grade. The expectation, I think, for FIU, given the money, given where they are at in terms of their conference relative to their other opponents, I genuinely think that FIU can make a lot of bowl games, and they should make lots of bowl games. Liberty, the disparity in terms of resources with Liberty and literally everyone else in that conference is a lot to overcome, right? So I don't think your expectations to win the conference championship or even compete year to year for a conference championship. I just think making bowl games and winning games consistently, finding ways to get to 6 wins, I think is the expectation. And that's raised from where it was at. Okay. So my grade here, I think it's going to be B plus, right? We talk about B is meeting expectations. A, we give a grade. We think they're going to exceed expectations. C, if we don't think they're going to meet expectations. I think that Willie Simmons can exceed expectations. And these are higher expectations than probably any coach FIU has ever had. So that's why I'm not giving him necessarily a higher grade, but I do think that the national consensus and here on this show is that Willie Simmons is a pretty good hire and a good fit at FIU.
Yeah, without a doubt. And obviously, being in the CUSA, you're going to be built into having probably top 25 easiest schedule every year, depending on how your out of conference falls.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, looking at your out of conferences, you're going to have Penn State, you're going to have UConn, you're going to have USF, Buffalo, Pete Lembo, Florida Atlantic's in there a bunch of times, and what Zach Kitley's doing over there in Boca Raton. So it'll be interesting there, but that should not change the fact you can go 1-3 or 0-4, 0-3, whatever it is in the out of conference, but you could still make a bowl game. Absolutely. We talked about this FIU team having one of the easier schedules, in college football this past offseason, and they didn't take advantage of it. And, I think Willie Simmons will be able to do that. I'm with you here. I'm going to go A-, as my grade here. I'm super high on Willie Simmons. I do not give A- as an ace just out willy-nilly like that. I think this is a super, super educated hire. I think he's going to succeed. He knows what he's doing. It sounds like he's being very intentional with how he's going about this and how excited he was. I think he's been waiting for an opportunity like this, being at Florida A&M for so long, having success there. Moving to Duke was a super strategic play for him to put himself in position to get a job like this. Yeah, I'm all for Willie Simmons. I cannot wait to watch FIU and what they do offensively and what they just do recruiting wise already in the portal and all that kind of good stuff. And you talked about how the expectations are unfortunately higher for him than they've been in the past, but I think that's for a due reason. I think he's part of that too, and he shows, the commitment to this program and obviously taking right steps in the direction, for Florida International, and obviously the South Florida there.
Yeah, the only coaches that you've given A-minuses to this offseason would be Willie Simmons. You gave Tim Albin, you gave Matt Entz, and Bronco Mendenhall, and Charles Huff, right? And those, I think we all agreed. I think the consensus is that the consensus that Bronco Mendenhall was probably the best hire of this offseason. So that's your only flat A. All those other guys got A-minuses, but to put him on the same level as Charles Huff there, and also Tim Albin, I think says a lot about what you believe in this hire and what I think the national consensus is believing as well.